I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator. Event is coming soon. YouTube channel. Here's the latest intel.
The Zionist Christian Alliance and the Great Deception. By Tony Smario. There is a war starting, but it's not one of the wars we are being told about. The plans for this war may be 100 years old or more, and they provide the path by which the great work of returning humankind to its golden age may be achieved. This is World War III, the Apocalypse, Armageddon. And it promises to come on the heels of rebuilding Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. Observation number 1, a strange alliance. There is something remarkable, and telling, in the fanatical unity of the Judeo-Christian alignment over the past 100 years. Remarkable, because these two religions have no way to reconcile their theological differences. One waits for a future Messiah, one blames the other for killing the Messiah more than 2,000 years ago. The two make an all the more unexpected pair considering the Christians were originally persecuted by the Jews, whose holy writings and the Talmud reject Jesus as a bastard who is boiling in hot excrement for eternity, whereas Christianity went on to persecute the Jews mercilessly for killing their Messiah, while warning everyone that if you don't believe in Jesus you're going to hell forever. What's telling, then, is that Western Christianity is so committed to Zionism that it undertakes extraordinary political and social machinations to preserve the Union. In the 7th century, the two were united by the loss, to Islam, of the Holy Land, which they both held sacred, and by the loss of the city at the center of their religious history. Today, they are united by ancient prophecies about the arrival of the Messiah, the end of the age, and the kingdom to come. That land and city were mandated to Christians more than 100 years ago in the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1915, which put modern-day Syria and Lebanon under French jurisdiction, with Iraq and Palestine under British jurisdiction. England disregarded the agreement it had made with Hashemite King Faisal I of Iraq, 1883–1933, to support him in establishing a Muslim caliphate in that land, that is, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Saudi Arabia, after asking the Hashemites to help the British defeat the Ottomans in World War I, which they did. Instead of a caliphate, the Muslims were eventually divided into puppet governments like those that exist today and, at that time, faced the birth of radical Islam in the newly created Kingdom of Saud, founded and supported by the same British government that had just double-crossed the Hashemites. It is worth observing that the current Hashemite king, of Jordan, has made it clear that he expects England to make good on its word to help establish a Hashemite caliphate on that land, and ISIS is not what he envisions. While Britain and France were dividing up the Middle East and screwing the Hashemites, in 1917 British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour declared in a letter to Walter Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community, that England intended to help establish a Jewish homeland on the piece of land called Palestine. The Jewish Holocaust had not yet occurred, but this empire that had subdued the world for Christianity declared that it wanted to give the Holy Land to future generations of Jews in order to help them perpetuate their rejection of Jesus as the Messiah and enable them to await the true Messiah in their renewed homeland. Who thought this was such a good idea in Christian England in 1917, and why? Who would pay for the creation of Israel? I will attempt to put the answers to these questions in perspective in the following observations about where all the money and political pressure to create the State of Israel came from, and continues to come from, and to what end. History records that 30 years after the Balfour Declaration, in the wake of the atrocities of World War II, a new organization called the United Nations established the State of Israel in Palestine, the immediate result being war with its Muslim neighbors, who had been living side by side with Jews for a millennium until the sudden, hostile occupation of their land. The wars continued for 30 years, and then an international peace process was begun that continues to this day. The peace process has resulted in the death of untold millions, the demise of stable governments, and the near destruction of the region and much of the culture. It is easily observed that the entire pretense for the current wars in the Middle East, and for the continuing threat of terrorism, is based on lies and underwritten by Zionist Christian money. The final point in this first observation is that the Muslims of that land, as well as Orthodox Muslims everywhere in all corners of the globe, still on the losing end of this 100-year-old agreement by the Hashemites to help the British defeat the Ottomans, are the only other people on the planet, besides Christians, who believe Jesus is the true Messiah of the Jews, and they are currently awaiting his return in fulfillment of their scriptures. Keep that in mind. Observation number 2, followed the money. Why did Walter Rothschild want a Jewish homeland in Palestine in 1917? Why did England pledge its support in the Balfour Declaration, and what kind of support did England provide? A couple years earlier, England was in a bad spot in the war with Germany, and it seemed as though the English would lose their country. Rothschild had promised to get the United States involved on the side of the British if England gave Palestine to Rothschild. History has recorded, though journalism rarely does, that the financing for Germany in World War I was also supplied by Rothschild's banking cartel. The Rothschilds would go on to own 80% of the land comprising the State of Israel 3 decades later, according to some records. The Rothschilds' financial exploits and methods are well documented, including loaning money to both sides of a conflict or funding a war to drive one side to compliance, as in the War of 1812. The French Revolution, in 1789, was the coming out party of this mode of financial terrorism, which was destined to rule the world from then till now. In this second observation, we notice where the money was flowing 100 years ago, when the United States was brought into World War I, so unpopular with its citizens, and instigated under methods of intrigue and propaganda familiar to every military conflict since. In 1913, after a 100-year struggle against an obstinately aware Congress, the Federal Reserve banking system was formally institutionalized in the United States, with no doubt regarding the system's origins and benefactors. In 1914 Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated, prompting European powers to go to war, including Russia, with Rothschild money supplying both sides of a conflict. In 1915 the Lusitania was sunk, the event designed to drag America into the war that the Rothschilds had promised England the United States would enter. Also in 1915 the Sykes-Picot Agreement was signed, dividing the Muslim Middle East into French and English mandates, financed by the Bank of England, which was owned by the Rothschilds, and forcing the British to double-cross the Hashemites regarding their caliphate and Muslim self-determination on that land. In 1917 the Balfour Declaration was sent to Lord Rothschild in recognition of England's intent to support the establishment of a Jewish homeland. This was shortly after political Zionism began in response to anti-Semitism, which itself arrived mysteriously in history without precedent in 1894 in France and what is known as the Dreyfus Affair, and unexpectedly in Russia, Poland, and Bulgaria at the end of the 19th century as well. Lord Rothschild happened to be president of the British Zionist Federation at the time of the Balfour Declaration. Something else happened in 1917 that was clearly financed by the same Rothschild money responsible for the Federal Reserve System in America, and that was behind the intention to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Why did Zionist Rothschild want the Tsar replaced, and why with communists? Of all the possible answers to that question, the one central to this second observation is the one least recognized or understood in popular culture. The result of the communist revolution was the unending genocide of one particular type of people for nearly a century, Orthodox Christians. It was Christian Russia that sought the ancient Orthodox Christian land of what is today called Turkey, and its strategic city of Constantinople, during World War I. Christian Russia might have stood against Rothschild's Zionism. The Rothschild-funded Bolshevik Revolution made sure that wouldn't happen. And it did something else in preparation for the future war that the third observation makes clearer. It set Christians up as future enemies of Islam, when Western Christianity became one with the Zionists, who require ever more weaponry, pointed at their Arab neighbors, for security. I will finish this second observation by noting that the Rothschilds' agents drafted the terms of the treaty with Germany after World War I and that those terms were designed to provide the conditions for World War II. The Rothschilds' money also funded Morgan, Rockefeller, Harriman, Carnegie, Ford, and like industrialists, through Jacob Schiff, who in turn supplied Hitler with the money and technology to fight the war and to create slave labor camps, which benefited the industrialists. But why did Zionist Rothschild want slave labor camps in Germany for Jews and a war with the Allies? War had already proven grossly profitable, but were the wars intended only to provoke nations to borrow in order to fight them? Or could a war be planned to do more than sell debt? In 1811, when the American Congress had voted to throw the Rothschild-funded banks out of the country, Nathan Rothschild famously said, "Either the application for renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself in a most disastrous war." That war began the following year in response to the obstinate refusal of the American Congress to renew the Rothschilds' bank charter. Until the terms of the Versailles Treaty created the conditions for World War II, the country where Jews enjoyed the most peaceful and integrated existence anywhere in Europe was Germany. The Zionist plan from at least 1901 was to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, but Palestine was full of Palestinian Arabs, not Jews. Europe was full of Jews living happily and safely. The question was how to get the Jews to want to leave Europe and immigrate to a new and strange land. We know the answer as World War II. And it was funded by the same people who gave us the Federal Reserve System in America, political Zionism, the Jewish homeland, the Bolshevik Revolution, and Nazi Germany, not to mention the Cultural Revolution in China. After World War II, Rothschild money was behind the establishment of the United Nations in 1945, as it had been behind the League of Nations decades earlier. Shortly afterward, in 1948, the United Nations created the State of Israel, and the so-called Judeo-Christian alliance was inseparably forged. Meanwhile, the same Rothschild money was funding the radicalization of Islam. What have the Zionist Christian elite got in mind for the future? Observation number 3, the Hegelian dialectic. In 1769 Meyer Amschel Rothschild became a court agent for Prince William IX of Hesse-Kassel, who was the grandson of George II of England, a cousin to George III, a nephew of the King of Denmark, and a brother-in-law to the King of Sweden. 1. Meyer Amschel Rothschild's creation of the Illuminati via Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria in 1776, on the heels of Rothschild's association with Prince William IX, points to a more profound web of control over future events than the whims of one man or one family, particularly given reports of the Illuminati's agenda. The purpose of the Illuminati is to divide the Goyim, all non-Jews, through political, economic, social, and religious means. The opposing sides were to be armed and incidents were to be provided in order for them to fight amongst themselves, destroy national governments, destroy religious institutions, and eventually destroy each other. 2. The aim was to divide and conquer by infiltrating the religions and every other spectrum of humanity. The plan was, over time, to arm each side with ideals that were hostile to one another and to promote violent confrontation, including the ever-advancing weaponry needed to achieve the most offensive violations of moral conduct and the most truthless and efficient taking of life. The media were to be used to pit one side against the other and to program humanity to accept war as an eventuality and religions as the cause. Terrorists were to be created and fought. All of this was a classic application of what has become known as the Hegelian dialectic. Meanwhile, any number of depopulation and eugenic programs have been administered under the cover of humanitarianism, and the average citizen is helpless, hopeless, ignorant, and impotent to interfere. Our current state of affairs fits the strategy supposedly outlined by General Albert Pike in 1871, which called for 3 world wars to achieve world dominance. Recall the power that had been wielded 60 years before Pike provided his strategy when England was forced into a war with the obstinate United States over renewing the Rothschilds' bank charter. And observe the statue of General Pike just blocks from the Capitol building in Washington, the only Confederate general so honored. The accuracy of Pike's predictions regarding the first two world wars demands attention to the third. The control displayed in the past 100 years over media, politics, education, medicine, justice, and the weather indicates that popular narratives are highly subject to propaganda and manipulation. Observe also the slogan of the State of Israel's Secret Service, Mossad, "By deception we shall rule and do war," and ask yourself what deception has gone on over the past 65 years during a constant state of war in Palestine. Terrorizing the Arabs while creating and blaming Arabs for ongoing acts of terrorism is an observable possibility. The great deception is this: the Zionists intend to use religious prophecy to dominate the world by reclaiming the Promised Land, by rebuilding Solomon's Temple, by replacing the Messiah according to a perverted interpretation of Jewish scripture called the Talmud, and by ensuring their perpetual reign forever through superior military force. What remains in the way of Pike's strategy of 1871? Only the remnants of Orthodox religion, namely Christians, Muslims, and Orthodox Jews. Each of these groups has pointed out the Zionist lie from the beginning and was undoubtedly targeted during World War II, as Orthodox Christians have been continuously targeted for 100 years. The desire to eliminate Orthodox Jews explains Britain's White Paper of 1939, in which it suddenly withdrew its support conveyed in the Balfour Declaration by prohibiting European Jews from immigrating to Palestine until after World War II and the Jewish Holocaust had largely fulfilled the task of eradicating a certain population of Jews, most likely those with Semitic connections to Palestine, and instilling the rest with fear of anti-Semitism. Only then did Britain facilitate their return to Palestine in order to repopulate it with Jews seeking a homeland, then a state, and eventually a temple, all paid for by American Christian industrialists, originally reimbursed by the Nazi slave labor camps they knowingly funded. Lastly, observe how the United Nations, formed in 1945 on the basis of eliminating armed conflict, has managed instead to mold a modern world where the largest market is weapons, the largest industry is war, and the only way conflicts are settled is through advanced weaponry and superior military alliances. For what reason has a Zionist Christian alignment created this reality if not to ensure the New World Order that its overseers plan to create from the ashes of chaos? Despite being obscured by a sea of distractions, the end game has only three observable goals, on which all action is focused: a centrally controlled and universal electronic monetary system, a far less populated New World upon which to impose order, and a final temple in Jerusalem from which to rule the world forever. Therefore, on the one hand, if I'm funding radical Islam with Zionist Christian money, if I'm building Zionist Christian weapons to bring the world peace and security but I'm not giving them to certain Arabs, and if I'm planning to rebuild Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem and to rule the world forever, then all I have to do is create an excuse for the Zionists to kill certain Arabs, while making a peace deal with the other Arabs, which I will later break, a deal that includes my new temple on their hill. And since Muslims themselves also expect a final great war, the decimation of Islam, and the emergence of their true Mahdi at the time of the return of the true Messiah of the Jews, who they regard as Jesus of Nazareth, it is imaginable that Muslims will be easily led into colluding in their own demise. On the other hand, if I want to start a war that kills all the Zionists and Christians, I need another enemy, one that I will have to provide with sufficient weapons for it to be able to do just that. Among this enemy, I will have to introduce, foster, and fund every anti-Christian Zionist ideal so that when the peace deal over the temple is broken, someone can be drawn into a war over it. I'm thinking of Russia, China, and their friend Iran, joined by a host of others. By that time, the excuse for world war may not be the new temple in Jerusalem and the Zionist Christian fight with Islam but economic existence in the New World. It is not hard to observe the future financial conflict being set up and the eerie possibility of a complete collapse of the money system, as anticipated by ancient prophecy, but that's a different story. Tony Smario has decades of experience interpreting eschatology with a unique voice. You can find him at the channel brosal.org on YouTube, where he provides weekly commentary on geopolitical events and a non-traditional Bible study demonstrating the false understandings of modern Christianity.
Please like us and share with your social media. Please subscribe and click the bell to be notified of our new videos.
Remember to check out our playlist for important intel you may have missed.
Be sure to enter our subscriber appreciation $100 monthly giveaway. The link is in our description.
And visit our sister channel. The event is coming soon for additional intel and information.
Stay tuned.
Victory of the Light.
Event is coming soon. YouTube channel.